Within a week, she had organized something called the Lakeside Beautification Committee, which sounds nice until you realize it was basically a hit squad targeting anyone who did not fit her country club vision. Suddenly, neighbors who had waved at me for years were crossing the street to avoid eye contact. Her Facebook posts were masterpieces of passive-aggressive warfare, concerned about eyesore properties affecting all our home values. Some people just do not care about the community Lakeside strong hashbot property values. The comments section turned into a feeding frenzy. People I had known for decades were suddenly experts on property law, parroting Karen's talking points like she was some kind of real estate prophet. 3 of my neighbors actually apologized to me privately. Tom and Susan Martinez pulled me aside during my evening walk and confessed that Karen had strongly suggested they complain about my property or face their own citation blitz. Apparently, she had already targeted old Mr. Peterson for having non-regulation window boxes and threatened the young couple with the baby over their unsightly playground equipment. "She has got something on everyone," Tom whispered, glancing around like Karen might be hiding in the bushes with a camera. "Her husband works up at the state capitol, connected political stuff." That hit me like a cold slap. This was not just neighborhood drama anymore. This woman had reached beyond our little lake community. That night, I found orange spray paint covering my mailbox, bright aggressive strokes that spelled out comply or leave. My security camera, solar-powered and hidden behind a pine tree, caught everything, including Karen's license plate as she drove away at 2:30 a.m. When I called the sheriff's office the next morning, guess who showed up? Deputy Chad Cromwell, Karen's nephew. He took one look at the vandalism report, shrugged, and said, "Probably just kids, you know how they are." The rough texture of that spray paint under my fingers as I tried to scrub it off felt like sandpaper against my soul. Pop used to say, "Sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight, time to find some bigger guns." Karen's next move came disguised as civic duty, which somehow made it even more infuriating. She had figured out that direct confrontation was not working, so she decided to weaponize the entire county bureaucracy against me. It started with a polite knock on my door from Building Inspector Dale Morrison, a guy I had actually worked with on several projects over the years. The awkward look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Marcus, I am real sorry about this, but I got a complaint about unpermitted structures on your property. I have to follow up on these things." 3 hours later, Dale had crawled through every inch of my cabin with his clipboard and measuring tape. His conclusion: everything was not only up to code, but actually exceeded current safety standards. Pop might have been old school, but he had built things to last. Whoever filed this complaint, Dale muttered as he packed up his gear, either does not know what they are talking about or they are just trying to waste everyone's time. The next day brought Environmental Officer Janet Bennett investigating reports of my septic system contaminating the lake ecosystem, again perfectly functioning, better than most new installations, she admitted. Then, Fire Marshal Bob Rodriguez showed up to examine my solar panels for hazardous electrical violations. Clean bill of health there too. Each inspection cost me a day of peace and a chunk of my retirement sanity. But more importantly, each false report was creating an official paper trail that made me look like some kind of problem property owner. I remembered something my union representative used to warn us about: bureaucratic harassment was a classic tactic because it looked legitimate on paper even when it was pure malicious. While I was dealing with the inspection parade, Karen was busy playing her media game. She had managed to get herself interviewed by Channel 7's Community Spotlight segment, positioning herself as this concerned citizen fighting to protect our family-friendly lake environment. The news story was a masterpiece of selective editing. She showed carefully angled photos that made my cabin look like some kind of backwoods shack, talked about dangerous conditions threatening children's safety, and painted herself as a brave advocate standing up against irresponsible property owners. What really got my blood boiling was watching her stand on my dock, the one she claimed was illegally trespassing, while she delivered her concerned citizen performance for the cameras. The crisp sound of my phone buzzing with angry texts from neighbors who had seen the story felt like machine gun fire. Half the lake community now thought I was some kind of environmental menace. But here is where Karen made her first real mistake. She got greedy. My old buddy Jake Martinez from the Electricians Union called me up after seeing the news story. "Marcus, that lady is full of it and everyone knows it. You built half the clean energy infrastructure in this county. Hell, your solar setup is the one I use as an example when I'm training apprentices." Within 2 days, Jake had organized a parade of my former co-workers to drive by and inspect my property. Turns out having 20 master electricians publicly vouch for your work tends to shut down the hazardous installation narrative pretty quick. Things took a sharp turn when my lawyer buddy, Chuck Davis, stopped by and told me the Attorney General's office was investigating homeowner association corruption. Multiple communities had reported the same harassment patterns, like elderly homeowners getting hit with bogus citations, property values being forced down, and mysterious buyers swooping in with cash. It matched everything I had been facing. Chuck said these schemes usually relied on political connections that gave cover while residents were driven out, then developers bought cheap and flipped for huge profits. He told me the Attorney General's office needed witnesses with documentation, and I might be the one they were looking for. That night, I began logging every citation and inspection and dug deeper into Karen's background. Her husband, Robert Cromwell, turned out to be the Democratic Party treasurer, connected to zoning changes and favors that made her actions look far more dangerous. Karen then escalated from harassment to character assassination. She posted on Facebook that I was a safety threat to children near the lake. Within hours, dozens had shared it, and comments painted me as violent, many from fake accounts clearly created to boost her lies. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order, portraying me as unstable and threatening leaders. Judge Patricia Rise dismissed it for lack of proof, but the damage was done. Now, there was an official record linking my name with threats, and the emotional weight hit me hard. Evenings on Pop's porch turned into moments of doubt, wondering if I should give up the fight and let go of the peace I had worked for. But support began to surface. Retired Judge Bill Carter, who once fished with my grandfather, reminded me this was no petty neighborhood quarrel. He said organized harassment like this always tied back to big money. Then, the local VFW, the Historical Society, and the environmental group all spoke publicly in my defense, emphasizing my record, my cabin's cultural value, and my sustainable living. The pressure on me started to lift as the community rallied. Hope began replacing the bitterness, but Karen was far from finished. Her next strike came by manipulating the utility company into investigating irregularities in my electrical service. For 3 days, I had no power, while they claimed to review my solar grid. Then came false police reports, suspicious activity in daylight, loud noises suggesting disturbances, and even accusations of drug use. In reality, the visitors were union buddies stopping by to show support. Each call brought deputies, each visit another report, all building a file that made me look like a problem. Deputy Chad Cromwell often showed up with a smirk, hinting I could end it all by apologizing to his aunt, Karen. That is when I realized Karen was sending a message to other property owners about what happened if you resisted. The Hendersons, who had sold under pressure, had probably endured the same nightmare. My phone became a weapon of anxiety, pinging with either support or another false claim. The breakthrough came while I was organizing paperwork for my meeting with the Attorney General. One violation notice included a small footer, fines payable to Lakeside Estates Community Improvement Fund, account number 847291. It looked official, but something felt off. At the county clerk's office, Betty pulled filings that exposed major discrepancies. The homeowner association had collected $280,000 in assessments for dock repairs that were never done. Another $150,000 supposedly went to Cromwell Grounds and Maintenance, a company owned by Karen's brother-in-law, incorporated just weeks after she became president. The insurance fraud was blatant. The homeowner association had claimed storm damage 3 times in 18 months, totaling $95,000. Betty cross-referenced dates with weather reports, clear skies every time. She whispered the truth aloud. This was fraud, plain and simple. My hands shook as I copied the evidence, feeling like I was holding proof that could change everything. The final piece was Clearwater Property Solutions, supposedly receiving $5,000 monthly for management. Its address was a P.O. box from Karen's own postal district. The picture was complete. Karen was not just harassing me out of spite, she was driving down property values, forcing families to sell cheap, then funneling embezzled funds into shell businesses tied to her circle. The Hendersons and others had been robbed twice, first when they sold their homes for far less than they were worth, and again through inflated fees. Pop's advice echoed in my mind: corruption is always bigger than you think. He was right. Karen was not running a homeowner association, she was running a criminal enterprise, and I was preparing to hand over the evidence to the only authority capable of shutting her down. That night, Pop's back bedroom became my investigation unit. So, this homeowner association president literally kicks down my cabin door right when I'm having a beer with the state attorney general. She just committed 6 felonies in front of the one person in America who could throw her in prison. I am talking full on with splintering, designer heels clicking on broken glass, the whole 9 yards. This woman in her 1000 blazer, reeking of that aggressive perfume that probably costs more than my truck payment, storms into my grandfather's cabin, screaming about violations and jurisdiction like she owns the place. Zero clue who she just barged in on. Zero clue she is live streaming her own arrest warrant to 3,000 followers. 6 months earlier, I thought Karen was just your typical power-drunk neighbor. Turns out she was running a $4 million embezzlement scheme, and I was about to accidentally burn her entire criminal empire to the ground. What would you do if some homeowner association psychopath invaded your private property during the most important meeting of your life? Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. I guarantee half of you have dealt with these neighborhood dictators before. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. 6 months ago, life was pretty damn good. My name is Marcus Henley. I am 52. And after 30 years of crawling through muddy trenches, installing power grids across 3 counties, I had finally earned my retirement. The crown jewel, my grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake, 2 acres of pure heaven that old Pop bought back in 1963 for $800. Can you believe that? $800 for lakefront property that is now worth more than most people's houses. This was not some fancy McMansion, mind you. We are talking hand-hewn logs, a stone fireplace that Pop built with his own calloused hands, and a screened porch that creaked in all the right places. I had kept it completely off-grid by choice, solar panels humming quietly on the roof, well water that tasted like childhood memories, and a septic system that actually worked better than most city setups. The morning mist rising off the lake each day reminded me why Pop chose this spot. He used to say, "Marcus, when someone wants your land real bad, find out why, because it is usually worth more than they are telling you." Smart man. He also used to say, "Marcus, when someone wants your land real bad, find out why, because it is usually worth more than they are telling you." Then she showed up. Delilah Cromwell, though everyone just called her that homeowner association psycho, rolled into our peaceful lake community like a tornado in designer clothing. Maps of the lake covered my walls, showing original boundaries against current homeowner association claims. Timeline charts tracked Karen's harassment alongside suspicious financial transactions, with documents sorted by potential charges. I felt like a detective, but instead of chasing killers, I was chasing suburban embezzlers. The Attorney General's office assigned 2 prosecutors, Sarah Mitchell and David Bennett. Sarah, sharp and tough, reminded me of job site inspectors. David, younger but intense, had already put white-collar criminals behind bars. They reviewed my files and confirmed this was systematic fraud affecting dozens of families. David revealed similar schemes in other counties, all run the same way: politically connected homeowner association leaders manipulating property values while embezzling funds. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was already involved. Agent Rebecca Torres explained during a video call that my documentation was the missing link tying cases together. She said financial crimes always leave a paper trail, and ours showed laundering, fake invoices, shell companies, and insurance fraud. But documents were not enough. They needed witnesses and recordings. Chuck, my lawyer buddy, had rallied 17 other families. At the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, their stories were heartbreaking. The Thompsons had paid $8,000 in bogus fines before selling cheap. The Garcias lost $12,000 in assessments for improvements that never happened. Mrs. Patterson, after 43 years, abandoned her home under threats and moved in with her daughter. Each story followed the same playbook: harassment, fake violations, forced sales, and money funneled into Karen's slush fund. Retired accountant Frank Weber analyzed the records and discovered the homeowner association had not filed tax returns for over 2 years, despite collecting hundreds of thousands. That alone could trigger federal tax evasion charges. The technical strategy session felt like a military operation, evidence, witnesses, harassment recordings, all in place. But Torres wanted more. To build an airtight case, she needed Karen caught on camera committing crimes. Chuck suggested the perfect setup. The Attorney General would announce new homeowner association reform legislation at my cabin. Symbolically powerful, it would bait Karen into interfering. Sarah agreed Karen's need for control would override her judgment. We spent a week preparing for what Torres called a controlled confrontation. Hidden recording equipment was installed, undercover officers positioned, and multiple agencies coordinated. Local media was alerted, social media campaigns prepped, and support networks readied. My union training kicked in. We planned every scenario with backup systems for the backups. The trap was set. Karen's pattern was so predictable we could script her next move. All we had to do was wait for her to kick down the door. Karen's harassment turned into outright sabotage. My solar panels started malfunctioning until Jake, my electrician buddy, found evidence of tampering. He had wisely set up a hidden camera, and 2 nights later it captured Karen herself creeping around my property with tools in hand. The footage showed the homeowner association president vandalizing my system under cover of darkness. Next came the boat dock. I returned from town to find Pop's cherished 1978 base boat drifting across the lake. Chains had been cut cleanly with bolt cutters, leaving metal shavings behind. The damage felt like someone desecrated his memory. But Karen's most reckless move was my septic system. After passing inspection, it suddenly failed. The emergency crew discovered industrial-grade chemicals had been poured into it, killing the bacteria and creating a toxic mess. Repairs cost $3,200, but more importantly, chemical analysis confirmed deliberate sabotage requiring specialized knowledge. At the same time, Karen launched a media smear campaign. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with identical posts about my supposed violations. Deputy Chad Cromwell began circling my cabin daily, parking in my driveway, and running visitors' plates. Inspectors suddenly appeared with fabricated code violations, fire hazards, and environmental complaints. It was death by 1,000 cuts, bureaucratic warfare designed to break me. She even targeted my supporters. Jake's license was placed under review. Retired Judge Bill Carter received a state bar complaint. The Veterans of Foreign Wars post faced a surprise fire inspection, and the Historical Society was hit with zoning challenges. Karen was sending a message: anyone helping Marcus would be punished. The pressure was suffocating, every day bringing new crises and emergencies. But her recklessness worked against her. Each escalation was documented. Sabotage created forensic evidence, and her intimidation tactics became more obvious. Even her allies began backing away, as her behavior grew unstable. The Attorney General's office quietly gathered everything, building an airtight case while Karen dug deeper. Agent Torres called it classic escalation. Cornered perpetrators often spiral until they hand prosecutors exactly what they need. Karen was doing just that, one reckless act at a time. Her boldest play came last. Through her husband's political connections, she discovered I was not meeting with some mid-level bureaucrat. I was meeting directly with Attorney General Patricia Williamson. And instead of backing down, Karen decided to go nuclear. Her plan was brilliant in its twisted logic. She would position herself as the victim of a political conspiracy, claiming that the state's top prosecutor was targeting her family for partisan reasons. If she could record herself confronting government corruption at my cabin, she could flip the entire narrative and paint herself as a brave whistleblower standing up to abuse of power. The first sign of her new strategy came through social media. She had reached out to Government Accountability Watch, one of those blogger networks that amplifies stories about bureaucratic overreach. Her pitch was perfect: small-town homeowner association president being persecuted by big government because her husband worked for the opposing political party. Local family under attack. State officials use harassment investigation to silence political opposition, was the headline that started circulating 3 days before my scheduled meeting. The story painted me as some kind of deep state operative working with corrupt prosecutors to destroy an innocent family. The comment section was flooded with outrage from people who had never heard of our lake community, but were absolutely convinced that Karen was being railroaded by partisan prosecutors. She had tapped into that vein of anti-government sentiment that runs through rural communities, turning herself into a martyr for political persecution. But Karen's masterstroke was the live stream setup. She had arranged to broadcast her confrontation with the Attorney General live on social media, framing it as citizen journalism, exposing government corruption in real time. Her plan was to burst into my cabin during the meeting, record everything, and let her followers spread the footage as proof of official misconduct. What she did not know was that we were monitoring her communications. Agent Torres had obtained warrants for Karen's phone and social media accounts weeks earlier. We knew about the blogger outreach, the live stream plan, even the talking points she had prepared for her spontaneous confrontation. "It is actually perfect," Agent Torres explained during our final coordination meeting. "She is going to commit multiple felonies on live video while providing us with a real-time confession of her motives. We could not have scripted it better." The irony was delicious. Karen thought she was setting a trap for us, but she was actually walking into the most thoroughly documented arrest in homeowner association history. Her support network was crumbling too, but she was too obsessed to notice. The other homeowner association board members had quietly distanced themselves once the financial irregularities became obvious. Her husband was facing his own ethics investigation and could not provide political cover anymore. Even Deputy Chad had been reassigned to different patrol areas after Internal Affairs started asking questions about his response to vandalism reports. But Karen was beyond rational thinking at this point. The psychological pressure of keeping her fraud scheme hidden while fighting off multiple investigations had pushed her past the breaking point. She was exhibiting all the classic signs of someone losing control, paranoid about neighbors spying on her, making increasingly threatening phone calls to anyone who had supported me, convinced that everyone was part of some vast conspiracy against her. The night before the Attorney General's visit, she made threatening calls to 4 different families, warning them about consequences if they continued collaborating with government harassment. Each call was recorded by law enforcement. Each one provided additional evidence of witness intimidation and criminal conspiracy. I spent that final evening sitting on Pop's porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. The sound of loons calling to each other across the water reminded me why this place was worth fighting for. Tomorrow would determine whether I would be able to enjoy peaceful evenings like this for the rest of my retirement or whether I would spend my golden years battling Karen's appeals from federal prison. The cabin felt different that night, not just because of the hidden cameras and recording equipment, but because it had become the center of something much bigger than my personal property dispute. This was about whether small-time criminals with political connections could terrorize entire communities without consequences. I pulled out Pop's worn leather Bible and read the passage he had underlined about David facing Goliath. He had written in the margin, "Sometimes the little guy wins because he is fighting for something bigger than himself." The morning would bring Karen's final desperate gambit. She would storm through that door thinking she was about to destroy her enemies, never realizing she was about to destroy herself. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, law enforcement was in position. All we had to do was wait for Karen to provide the grand finale to her own criminal career. The taste of anticipation mixed with morning coffee had never been so sweet. Attorney General Patricia Williamson was nothing like I had expected. Instead of some intimidating political figure, she was this down-to-earth woman in her 50s who reminded me of my old high school principal, tough but fair, with eyes that missed nothing. She had arrived at my cabin at exactly 9 a.m. carrying a thermos of coffee and a briefcase full of evidence that would change everything. "Mr. Henley," she said, settling into Pop's old recliner like she belonged there, "your documentation has helped us build cases against homeowner association corruption rings in 6 counties. What you have uncovered here is not just local fraud, it is part of a statewide pattern of organized theft." We were deep in discussion about the criminal charges when we heard it. The distinctive roar of Karen's Escalade pulling into my driveway way too fast, gravel spraying everywhere like she was conducting some kind of high-speed chase. Car doors slammed, multiple voices shouting instructions about camera angles and audio levels. Karen had brought her entire social media production crew for what she thought would be her moment of triumph. "Here we go," Agent Torres whispered into her earpiece from her hidden position behind my woodshed. Attorney General Williamson did not even flinch. She just calmly continued taking notes about the financial evidence while Karen's voice got louder, working herself up into righteous fury for her live stream audience. "This is it, folks," Karen's voice carried clearly through my windows. "We are about to expose the corruption that has been targeting our family. The state's attorney general is illegally meeting with our harasser, probably planning more government persecution." The sound of her designer heels clicking aggressively across my wooden porch was like a countdown timer to disaster. For her disaster, not mine. Crash. The door exploded inward like she had used a battering ram instead of her foot. Wood splintered everywhere. The Attorney General's coffee mug hit the floor with a ceramic crash that punctuated the moment perfectly. Karen stormed into my living room with her phone held high, live streaming everything, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just committed criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and assault in front of the state's chief prosecutor. "I demand to know why the Attorney General is secretly meeting with this man," she screamed, waving her phone around like it was some kind of weapon. "This is government harassment, political persecution. I have rights." The look on her face when Attorney General Williamson calmly stood up and displayed her official identification was absolutely priceless. Karen's live stream captured the exact moment when her brain processed what had just happened. Total frozen terror. "Mrs. Cromwell," the Attorney General said in that calm, professional tone that probably made hardened criminals wet themselves, "I am Patricia Williamson, Attorney General of this state. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence, and your entire criminal performance is being recorded by both my office and your own social media broadcast." Karen's phone was still live streaming. Her followers were watching in real time as their heroic whistleblower turned into a babbling, incoherent mess. The comments section exploded with confusion and disbelief as people realized they had been supporting a criminal who had just self-destructed on camera. This is my community, I have jurisdiction here," Karen stammered, still somehow thinking her homeowner association badge gave her authority over state prosecutors. That is when Federal Bureau of Investigation Agent Torres stepped through my still open doorway flanked by two other federal agents. "Mrs. Cromwell, you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness intimidation, and criminal harassment, and thanks to your live stream, we have your confession broadcast to about 3,000 witnesses." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through my cabin like the closing of a book. Karen's phone clattered to the floor, still streaming her arrest to an audience that had shrunk from outraged supporters to horrified voyeurs watching a public meltdown. "Karen," I said, standing up from Pop's couch with a satisfied smile, "meet the state's Attorney General. She has been wanting to discuss your bookkeeping methods." The neighbors who had been drawn by the commotion stood on my porch watching in stunned silence as the woman who had terrorized our community for months was read her Miranda rights in my living room. Mrs. Patterson, who had driven down from her daughter's place specifically for this moment, had tears streaming down her face. Sheriff Rodriguez arrived just in time for the perp walk, Karen stumbling in handcuffs past the same dock she had tried to have demolished, past the same solar panels she had claimed were hazardous, past the same cabin she had called an eyesore. The pearl-white Escalade with its Rule 1 vanity plates was towed away as evidence in the fraud case. The live stream ended with Karen's voice echoing across the lake. "This is not over. My husband will fix this. You do not know who you are dealing with." Actually, Karen, we knew exactly who we were dealing with, a criminal, and criminals go to prison. Watching Karen get sentenced 3 months later felt like Christmas morning. 58 years old, fresh from some California subdivision where apparently being neighborhood dictator was a full-time career. She drove this pearl-white Escalade with vanity plates that read Rule 1. I kid you not. And wore her homeowner association president badge on her blazer like it was a sheriff's star. The woman had one mission in life: transform our rustic lakefront into what she called an upscale resort community. But here is what I did not know then. 3 elderly couples had already sold their cabins to interested buyers within 2 months of her arrival. Funny coincidence, right? Her first act of war came on a Tuesday morning. I am sitting on Pop's porch drinking coffee and watching a pair of loons teach their babies to dive when I hear these sharp clicking sounds on my wooden dock, designer heels, at 7 a.m. on my private property. 10 minutes later, she is taping this official-looking notice to my screen door. Violation citation, unsightly dock structure damaging community property values. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 72 hours or daily penalties will accrue. I had to read it twice. My weathered dock, the same one Pop and I had reinforced together when I was 12, was apparently an eyesore threatening the entire neighborhood's real estate market. Being a reasonable guy, I walked over to explain that my property actually predates the homeowner association by about 40 years. You know what she said to me standing there in my own driveway, hands on her hips like she owned the place? Everyone on this lake answers to me, "Sweetie?" Asked the Hendersons how well fighting me worked out for them. The Hendersons, my elderly neighbors, who had mysteriously decided to downsize last month after living here for 23 years. The pieces were not clicking yet, but something cold settled in my stomach. That is when she started her photography session, circling my cabin like a real estate appraiser, snapping pictures of my solar panels, my vegetable garden, even my grandfather's hand-carved porch railings. The smell of her chemical air freshener wafting from that idling Escalade made me want to gag. By the end of the week, I had 3 more citations. Each one came with escalating fines. Each one made it crystal clear that Delilah Cromwell had declared war on everything my family had built on this land. I figured I was dealing with your typical power-tripping neighbor, annoying sure, but manageable. What I did not know was that I just painted a target on my back in a game much bigger and more dangerous than petty homeowner association politics. Pop's words echoed in my head, "Find out why they want your land." I was about to find out why, and it would change everything. Karen did not waste time escalating to the big guns. 3 days after my compliance deadline passed, because seriously, I was not tearing down Pop's dock for some wannabe dictator, a certified letter arrived that made my coffee taste like ash. Cease and desist, violation of community waterway regulations. The letterhead read, Blackstone, Meyer and Associates, one of those fancy law firms where the partners probably charge more per hour than I made in a month. The legal gibberish basically said my dock was illegally extending into community waterway and I owed $3,000 in retroactive violation fees. Plus they were threatening to slap a lien on my property if I did not pay up within 10 days. My first instinct was panic. These people had lawyers. I had a toolbox and a bad attitude. But then I remembered something Pop always drummed into me during those long fishing afternoons. Marcus, when someone is trying to legal talk you out of your land, the real truth is always in the county records. Never trust what they tell you. Go find the actual papers. So, I drove down to the county courthouse, that musty basement where all the important stuff gets buried under decades of bureaucratic dust. The clerk, a sweet lady named Betty, who remembered Pop from his fishing tournament days, helped me pull the original property surveys. I had learned this trick from my union days. Always check the source documents before some suit tries to buffalo you with fancy letterhead. What I found made my blood boil. My grandfather's lot did not just go to the water's edge. It included 50 feet into the lake. The deed stamped and official from 1963 was crystal clear. That dock was not trespassing on community property. It was sitting smack dab in the middle of my lake. But here is the real kicker. The homeowner association was not established until 1998, 35 years after Pop bought his land. I remembered my old foreman always saying that older properties often have rights that newer developments cannot touch. Something about grandfathered exemptions that trump any neighborhood association nonsense. Armed with copies of everything, I marched back to my cabin feeling pretty damn proud of myself. That satisfaction lasted exactly until I tried to leave for groceries and found Karen's Escalade parked sideways across my driveway. Not beside it, not near it, directly blocking it like she was conducting some kind of one-woman traffic stop. When I knocked on her window, she rolled it down just enough to speak through the gap. "Oh, Marcus, I am just reviewing the community parking regulations. This might take a while." The mechanical hum of her idling engine mixed with that sickly sweet air freshener created this surreal bubble of passive-aggressive insanity. Here I was, a grown man who had built half the county's electrical infrastructure, being held hostage in my own driveway by a suburban soccer mom with a power complex. But Karen was just getting warmed up. Federal Judge Michael Harrison did not just throw the book at her, he launched the entire law library. 3 years in federal prison, $340,000 in restitution to defrauded homeowners, and a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowner association board in the United States. Her husband, Robert, was not far behind. The ethics investigation revealed he had been using his position as Democratic Party treasurer to provide insider information about zoning changes and development plans. He resigned in disgrace and got 18 months for conspiracy and abuse of office. The homeowner association itself was dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee. In its place, we formed the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association, emphasis on volunteer, no mandatory fees, no citation authority, no power-drunk presidents, just neighbors working together to keep our little slice of paradise beautiful. My role in exposing the corruption scheme earned me something I never expected: whistleblower compensation from the recovered fraud funds. Turns out when you help the federal government recover hundreds of thousands in stolen money, they are pretty generous with the rewards. That check for $45,000 felt like vindication for every sleepless night Karen had caused me. But the real victory was watching justice ripple outward. Attorney General Williamson used our case as the foundation for new state legislation that I still cannot believe has my name on it. The Henley Act requires all homeowner associations to undergo annual independent financial audits and creates criminal penalties for harassment-based property manipulation schemes. 3 other counties used our evidence to prosecute similar fraud rings. Turns out Karen's operation was part of a much larger network of politically connected criminals systematically robbing homeowners across rural communities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's final report identified over 24 related cases spanning 5 states. The families who had been driven from their homes started coming back too. The Hendersons bought a beautiful new cabin 2 lots down from mine after their old property's fraudulent value concerns were legally voided. Mrs. Patterson moved back from Florida and threw a block party that lasted until sunrise. Property values did not just recover, they soared. Turns out when you remove the constant threat of harassment and fraudulent citations, people actually want to live in a peaceful lakefront community. Who would have thought? The transformation went beyond legal victories. Our little lake became a model for sustainable community living. My off-grid cabin, once Karen's target for eyesore citations, now hosts monthly tours for people interested in solar power and environmental stewardship. The State Environmental Agency featured us in their Renewable Energy Showcase program. I established the POPs Legacy Scholarship using part of my whistleblower compensation, $500 grants for kids entering trade school programs. POP always believed that working with your hands was the foundation of an honest life. It seemed fitting to help the next generation learn those same values. The annual Clearwater Lake Festival has become a regional attraction, raising money for veterans' housing assistance programs. Last year, we brought in enough to fund 3 tiny home projects for homeless veterans. The sweet smell of barbecue and the sound of families laughing together replaced the toxic atmosphere Karen had created. But the best part, the quiet moments. I am sitting on Pop's porch right now, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and purple. The loons are calling to each other across the water, their voices echoing off the same hills where Pop taught me to fish 60 years ago. My solar panels hum peacefully on the roof, powering a life that is finally my own again. No more certified letters, no more inspection visits, no more designer heels clicking across my dock at dawn, just the gentle lap of waves against weathered wood and the knowledge that sometimes if you are stubborn enough and righteous enough, David really can beat Goliath. The documentary crew from Netflix finished filming here last month. Homeowner Association Hell: How One Man Took Down a Criminal Empire premieres next spring. They paid me enough to add a guest cabin where other harassment victims can stay while fighting their own battles. Because Karen was not unique, there are power-drunk homeowner association dictators in communities across America terrorizing elderly homeowners and stealing from community funds. But now there is a roadmap for fighting back. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment sharing your own homeowner association nightmare. Trust me, you are not alone in this fight. These stories need to be told. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about everyday people taking down corrupt systems, because there is a lot more where this came from. Next week, I am telling you about the city councilman who tried to shut down a veteran's food truck until the owner's Pentagon buddies decided to pay a visit. Thanks for hanging out with us on Homeowner Association Stories, where the Homeowner Association Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you are ready for the next wild Homeowner Association tale.